My name is Kristina Marusic. I'm a reporter with Environmental Health News. We're a national nonprofit digital media organization focused on how problems with the environment impact human health. We mostly cover these issues nationally, but we're working to develop regional reporting bureaus. Pittsburgh is the first, and I am the Pittsburgh Bureau. So I've written extensively about environmental justice issues in the Pittsburgh region, especially with regard to air pollution and water contamination. And I'll introduce my lovely panelists in just a second, but I also wanted to take this opportunity to give a little plug for my Environmental Health News weekly Pittsburgh newsletter. It's a roundup of all the stories related to environmental health and climate change in southwestern Pennsylvania. It goes out on Friday mornings, and it's not just our media outlet, it's all the media outlets in the region and nationally writing on these issues. If you Google EHN, subscribe to Pittsburgh Weekly, it should come right up. And joining me on stage today are Heather Harr. Heather is the project director for the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania's Straight Scoop on Shale project, which includes examining the public health impacts of shale gas development. It also includes working with communities to explore and implement clean, sustainable economic development. Prior to returning to, thank you. Yes, please welcome Heather. A little more about Heather. Prior to returning to her native Pittsburgh, Heather worked at the Santa Fe Indian School and as a contractor with the New Mexico Department of Health to address tobacco marketing to youth and secondhand smoke, and in the private sector as a director of primary research at ABC Television Network. Next up, we have Roderick Harris.
Hello.
Rod is the director of public health and a deputy director, Rod is a doctor of public health and a deputy director at the Allegheny County Health Department. In that role, Rod is responsible for overseeing the Community Health Promotion and Disease Prevention Bureau. Prior to his current position, Dr. Harris was director of the Center for Health Equity at the Sedgwick County Health Department in Wichita, Kansas. Please welcome Roderick Harris. Next up, we have Justine Russo. Justine leads award-winning sustainability programs as Director of Sustainability and Business Intelligence at PITT OHIO, which is a Pittsburgh-based company that provides transportation and delivery services to businesses across the U.S. Her role includes heading the cross-functional steering committee, implementing the company's carbon calculator, and reporting on actionable sustainability metrics. In 2017, she joined the board of directors for Sustainable Pittsburgh. Please welcome Justine. And finally, we have Dwayne Thomas. Dwayne is a retired mine worker who was born, raised, and currently resides in Fayette County. He was an auto worker for 9 years before becoming a member of the United Mine Workers, which he's been a part of for 43 years. He's the president of Maple Creek Local 1248. He's also now the president of the Pennsylvania Alliance for Retired Americans, an organization of 300,000 Pennsylvania retirees who advocate for working people. And the Pennsylvania Alliance for Retired Americans has partnered with the Center for Coalfield Justice to work on economic justice issues in southwestern Pennsylvania. Welcome, Dwayne. Thank you. So to start out, I wonder if each of you could speak a little bit about some of the impacts of climate change that you've seen already in the southwestern Pennsylvania communities where you live or work. And we can start wherever you like, if anyone's dying to start, or we can just go in order.
Okay. Well, this is a personal impact, and it really is something that made me feel like climate change is here and be afraid of it. And that is that I guess it was 2013 or 2014. It wasn't warm, it was cold. And I saw a physicist on TV explaining how the rings, the airflow was no longer keeping the cold air at the poles, that it was coming down, and that's why we have the polar vortex. Mm-hmm. And during that time, a pipe in my basement broke, and we caught it right away, so we didn't really have that much damage, but that was just frightening to me, and I still am frightened because I have an old house that's not adequately insulated. But when the upcoming winter, how cold will it be? Because the temperatures can kind of be anything these days. boundaries are so far. So that made me feel like it's really important. And, you know, the development that's posed for this region is going to contribute to emissions and climate change. And so that makes it really, really, it's like salient, you know, this is real and this is what can happen to us.
Extremely excited about is the amount of discussion in this region. There has just been so many people that are involved in this topic, and it really, as dire as the conversation was this morning, I think that's the glimmer of hope, that people are recognizing the issue, and maybe we can't fix everything tomorrow, but we are attempting different things to get us at least on a better path.
I think the thing that I've seen over the past several years in our county seat in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, is there's a creek that runs through the town called Redstone Creek. The rains have been so hard that it's flooded several times and done a lot of damage. So I think that's where I see the most change.
And I was also thinking too, when we think about all of these disasters that we have locally, whether it's the landslides, that's not something that we've always seen or have seen as much as we've seen recently. Also Lyme disease, that's starting to rear its head and starting to increase in rates. And so I think that we need to think about the impact that climate has on just the life cycle of mosquitoes even, and all the other vector-borne diseases.
Do you have a sense of whether people in your communities recognize these things, like the rise in ticks, West Nile virus, landslides, severe weather events, whether the communities you live in and work with recognize those as being a result of climate change?
That's a good question. I don't know. I would say that I think people are starting to wonder why these things are happening where they haven't been happening before. I think some people might even be in denial that it's climate change and just might think that it's just ecology. I don't know, but I do think that people are starting to, as you said, bring up the issue, starting to discuss the issue, and thinking about ways to plan around it. So I think that's a positive sign that maybe people are at least entertaining the idea.
Yeah, and how do you think we could increase awareness of that connection between these sort of severe weather events and these ecological events and climate change in our communities?
Well, maybe by working with the people who do the weather to, you know, make those connections or have monitors at different, you know, we learn a lot. We like empower people to learn about doing air monitoring. And so maybe if the local TV stations could show, you know, what the air is at a particular school and get communities involved in understanding that, like a citizen science kind of thing, which is something that we do. So, and a lot of the people in the environmental advocates are training people to monitor air and water. And so that's something, you know, we could connect through the weather forecast to climate change.
Thank you, Heather. Those are really interesting and intriguing suggestions, and I wonder if you can speak a little bit more about how the League of Women Voters has approached some of those issues. I know you work in both suburban and rural communities, and there's kind of this long-held notion that maybe people in rural communities don't care about climate change, aren't invested in protecting the environment. Can you talk about a little more about some of the air monitoring you've done and how you've approached the real or perceived divide between urban and rural communities on climate issues?
Yeah, well, we actually ourselves have not done the air monitoring, but at our Cheyenne Public Health Conference, one of them is coming up on November 19th at the University of Pittsburgh University Club from 9 to 5, online at SWPA.org. But anyway, so at that conference, we featured some, you know, in our citizen science section, you know, people who can teach about this. But what we've been doing actually is an outgrowth of our project is working on the sustainable economy and doing initiatives outside of the city of Pittsburgh. We did start doing visioning inside the city of Pittsburgh, but we wanted to work out in the rural and suburban communities as well. And we didn't want to just come there and say, well, we're from Pittsburgh and here's Mayor Peduto's plans. We were doing that here, but we didn't want to come and like foist that on another community. So what we're doing is we're actually having people engage. The League is a civic engagement organization, and we study things, we learn about things, but we engage people in dealing with issues. And so we've started visioning over the past few years with Reimagine Beaver County, Reimagine Butler County, and then in Indiana County, we held an educational conference, these summits we've been doing annually to show the diversity of approaches that can be taken to provide for sustainable economic development. And so people are engaging in coming up with ideas of what they would like to see for sustainable economic development in their communities. So it's people's ideas and getting them to talk with each other. And probably, I don't know if climate change deniers come to the events that we do, but we're dealing with people, and people don't have to come in carrying like the flag of one team or another. It's just getting together and talking about issues and trying to come up with solutions. And that's, it's a very positive experience. And it's positive for people who have been in the environmental movement, who get to take part in this or who help plan it. It's like someone was saying the other day, I went around doing flyers and I was amazed at how many stores put it in their windows, and they were very positive about this. This was for a solar tour, as opposed to maybe they'd gotten some resistance in the past. So there's a real interest in coming up with positive solutions.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Has anyone else found that focusing on solutions instead of convincing someone there's a problem is more effective, or is working in your communities?
We've gotten very positive feedback from the initiatives that we've put into place. We've worked very closely with the communities where we've put new terminals. They're very interested in what the impact's going to be. Our terminal outside of Pittsburgh and Harr, the runoff actually goes into a creek, and they were very concerned about what the impact was going to be. So we made sure we put in bioswales and natural landscaping so that water was actually cleaner when it went into it. So it's been a two-way street with the communication.
And I would also say for many communities that are disproportionately affected, they have talked about the problem quite a bit. And I hear that when I go out, that we've done these assessments, we've done these surveys, now let's focus on the solutions. And so they're ready. We just have to get to where they are. So how do we get this information to where they are currently going for information? Some of that might be social media, some of that might be other convenings that they are having in these communities that we're not having the climate conversation at, but the opportunities are there. I think we just have to take them seriously.
Thank you. Dwayne, I wanted to ask you in particular, Gen Z and millennials across the political spectrum are more likely than baby boomers and older generations to believe in the reality of climate change. Have you found particular strategies, such as focusing on solutions or other strategies, most effective in reaching older, retired Pennsylvanians on this issue?
To tell you the truth, I really haven't had a lot of conversations, because where I come from, it's hard to have a conversation with my peers that have worked in the industry that I worked in, and you just don't have that conversation a lot with them. I myself, and I've talked to my closer friends about it, and I've even had an article in the New York Times about it, that my president, Cecil Roberts, has seen, and they said it's okay, you know, just don't go too far with it. But I mean, it's something that I believe, and I've told them that, that this is a real thing. It needs to be dealt with. And that's the reason why I'm here today.
So historically, thank you. Yeah, we can definitely applaud that. As someone who has a long history in organized labor, do you have any thoughts on why the real or perceived rift between labor and environmentalists persists?
I don't know that I would call it a rift. I would call it a lack of communication. But let me give you a little background on myself. My brother was killed in a mining accident. My dad died of black lung. My grandfather, my dad's dad, was killed in a mining accident. So there's a lot of things that, have happened in my life, being a coal miner, it's right now the environmental movement is asking people who have sacrificed plenty to give up more, either in exchange for nothing or in exchange for a promise called a just transition that no one can describe and is totally unfunded, and the most powerful people in DC oppose. It is any wonder that workers say no to that. And that's, we have to be given a position, and we have to be, and I'll go to another subject. We're fighting for our lives right now, for our pensions and our health care. Been fighting for 6 years. Been on Capitol Hill numerous times, lobbying our congressmen and our senators. We finally got our health care taken care of in 2017 through the Congress and the president signing it. We've been fighting ever since then to get our pensions. Yesterday, Murray Energy, the last remaining coal operator in the BCOA, filed bankruptcy. We may have had 2 years left before we became insolvent. We have about 6 months now before our pensions become insolvent and our health care is taken away from us. What I would like to do, everybody here has a cell phone. I would like to give you a number to call your senators and ask them to support Senate Bill 27. The number is 1-866-828-4162. That's the way that you can help us in this fight that we have to preserve our pensions and health cares. And again, it's 866-828-4162, get you to the switchboard at the Capitol.
I have a question for Justine. I'll ask Justine next. So trucking and transportation are very fuel-intensive industries. I wonder if you can speak a little about what responsibility companies like yours and others in this sector have when it comes to slowing climate change.
So, the big thing that I think of is that climate change is, a significant issue. We've heard much about that. I also think that we could provide zero emissions if we took every truck off the road, but that's not realistic. I think we all like Amazon free delivery, and the trucking industry fuels our economy, right? So I think what's important is looking at how do we innovate the industry? What are we going to do next? And I've been very lucky to work for PITT OHIO, where we have had the opportunity to experiment with renewable energy. Ron Godovic is here. He has helped us very much put in wind stacks, wind turbines. We have solar. We just opened up a new facility that's going to generate enough power for a 1.2 megawatt microgrid. And the goal is to fuel trucks off of that electricity, that renewable energy. Fact of the matter is the trucks aren't there yet. The technology, they're working on it. It's going to take, probably a few years and a few iterations. I remember our VP of operations responding to an email about our first electric truck, which we just received about 3 weeks ago. And it had about a 6,000-pound payload and 150-mile charge, right? So that's how far you could go with it. And his email back was no. Because, you know, when you put vehicles like that into the operation, you really have to think about what can they deliver? How do you prevent having to put 2 trucks on the road, because now you've got a very large load and this can't go on that kind of truck. So it's very challenging, but I don't think trucking companies will be able to operate in the long term without thinking about this and how are they going to address it in the future.
Does automation play a role in those decisions?
I think it does in the sense that there are a lot of routes that are very long and cross-country, and that's really hard to, when they talk about a driver shortage, that's where it's hard to hire drivers. That's a very challenging quality of life, and less, or fewer and fewer, people want that kind of lifestyle. So anything where we can use self-driving trucks that can take some of the burden off of humans, I think that's going to be a benefit.
Rod, is the health department talking about climate change's potential impacts on public health in the region? And if so, how are you preparing to deal with some of those things?
So we have had some conversations. As a part of our strategic plan that we're currently operating under, it is in our plan that by the end of 2020, we will have a climate action plan as a part of the health department's strategic plan. And so that's a start. I'm not sure what that will look like, how will we engage the communities, but I believe that would really entail us really looking at what the vulnerabilities are locally, what some of the projected risk might be, and the projected burden of disease will be on certain populations, and really overlaying that with communities that are already disproportionately affected by poor health outcomes, low socioeconomic status, et cetera. So.
Have you already seen any of those impacts sort of disproportionately impacting communities that already bear those impacts? For example, some of the things you mentioned, like insect-borne diseases and flooding, have you observed that here in the region?
Possibly. I don't work in the Epi Bureau, but I will say that we do know that when we overlay maps of all of our different county areas, that we will see that the same areas generally that have high blood pressure, diabetes, other chronic diseases, asthma, they tend to be the same communities. Oftentimes they are along the rivers, so we do know that much. And if we think about our county specifically in the southeast portion, we see a little bit more than we do in the other parts of the county.
Thank you. So Western Pennsylvania has always been a center for resource extraction and heavily polluting industries. We've seen another boom in recent years with the fracking industry and now the plastic industry that's moving in too. Do you all have thoughts on whether Western Pennsylvania can be a leader in stopping climate change while also welcoming these polluting industries?
They could both be side by side. You just have to institute the technology to make sure that the air is clean that they're using, that they're putting the air is clean that they're putting back into the atmosphere from whatever they're manufacturing. And I think that can be done, you know, with the technology that's out there.
But we already know that the industries we have here frequently violate clean air laws. You know, there are lots of complaints by environmental organizations that we have a pay-to-pollute system in place. So what do you say about what would you want to see done differently for these new industries than is happening currently with the industries that are here that regularly break clean air and clean water regulations?
Enforce the EPA laws that are on the books. They're there for a reason. They're just not being, you know, enforced. And when you cut back on the deregulation like the administration has done, I mean, it's no wonder that there's more pollutants in the air.
And Rod, do you, as someone on the public health side, have much to say with the health department's regulatory wing? Is that something, you know, are you able to kind of weigh in on some of these problems?
So I think what our biggest issue is that a lot of the activists and community residents do not realize that the health department is really bound by the Department of Environmental Protection Regulations. So we can only enforce what we're able to enforce. I know that sometimes people perceive that we can do more, but I don't think that that is actually the case. And so I think that that's where we struggle many times. From what I hear, I don't work in the Environmental Bureau, but in the conversations that I hear, I believe that's really what the biggest issue really is, that we're limited. So I think our role could really be, how can we empower residents to get more involved with their policymakers, with their state representatives or whatnot, to really help change the rules that they feel need to be enforced.
And you know, I've done some reporting on air pollution here, looking at fence-line communities that are disproportionately impacted. They tend to be poorer communities. They tend to be communities of color, like we see in Clairton. Is that data something you've looked at on the public health side of things? And is that data that you provide to the regulatory side of the health department?
They are aware of these health outcomes. I mean, we have a community health assessment that we do. We also have community health indicators. We have a dashboard on our website that people can go and take a look at their communities and see what the community health indicators are. Some of those are environmental indicators. So the data are there. And I do believe that we need to take a closer look at how we can get people more aware of these resources and give them some tools on how to use them and how to use them effectively as far as advocacy.
Thank you. And we can get you out of the hot seat now. Does anyone else have thoughts on whether those two things can happen simultaneously, on whether we can welcome these new polluting industries while also being a leader on slowing climate change?
Well, when we first started doing the visioning, we were, looking at getting people to engage and looking at, handed description of a shale gas scenario for growth and a sustainable, scenario for growth, citing things like this green conference center that we're sitting in now, the convention center, and the bike paths and everything. And it does seem to be like it's incongruous. So, but just, not telling people, oh, they don't go together, but having people learn about these things and then decide for themselves what they see. And, we can go down these paths at the same time, but I don't know for how long. So we really do need to consider quality of life and the health considerations.
I hope we can welcome those industries into these conversations because, yes, pay to pollute is not good, but how do we talk about reducing the pollution altogether? When you reduce waste, you take cost out of your process and then you become more sustainable. So hopefully if there's somebody willing to come into the conversation, I think we've found that the more we talk about our wins and our potential failures, that is information that other people can utilize. So I'm hoping, we have a responsibility of working with all of the industries in this region to up the game on sustainability.
Thanks, Justine. So you all represent sort of different communities in the region. I wonder if you have thoughts on how communities with different interests, like the business community or retirees, environmental advocates, the health department, or government employees can work together to protect their communities from the worst effects of climate change.
Well, I think that it's really good when different sectors work together. And if you look at Indiana County, the Indiana County Sustainable Economic Development Task Force, and in that county, so there's the IUP, so there's education, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, the downtown partnership in the business community, there's the Indiana County Commissioners, and then there's citizens and different working together, and they have been able to accomplish a lot. And I think it's partly because these different sectors are working together with the goal of implementing all these sustainable ideas, having to do with renewable energy and sustainable agriculture and sustainable building construction. and land stewardship. There's a lot in there, and things are getting done because different sectors are working together.
And I think different sectors are fine, but until you talk to the residents that are living these experiences, I still think we're missing it. So when we're at these tables, whatever industry we're in, we need to think about who's missing. If we're talking about people being affected by these impacts, then are they at the table? And if not, then we need to think about why. We need to also think about if this is the best way that we could be approaching this, and I can guarantee you it's not. So. Thank you.
Yeah, I get to work a lot with Sustainable Pittsburgh, who, is part of this conference today. And one of the words Joylette uses a lot is convener. And that's what they're trying to do, is to convene different parts of the community. And like I said before, it's been really exciting to see the progress. There's always more to be done. And I think it's always keeping an eye on who's at the table, and as Rod said, who's not at the table.
I think I'd like to come at it a little different way. In Pennsylvania in 2017, the health benefits paid out by my union, by the funds, was $114 million in the state of Pennsylvania, $74 million in pensions. You take that out of the economy, and it hurts a lot of people, not just us, a lot of people down ballot, as you would say. They get hurt because businesses get hurt because that money's not in the economy. So that's basically where I would come at it from, that angle.
And so how can we, I guess I wonder if any of you can speak to ways that you, in your work, so Justine, for instance, while working on sustainability initiatives at PITT OHIO, you mentioned engaging the community on some things like pollution. Mm-hmm. Are there other ways that you have interfaced with the community that you've found to be effective ways of bringing people from the community into those conversations?
I mentioned the words driver shortage. So I was hearing Chuck Hamill is our owner and president. He found an article, I believe from the 1890s, that talked about a driver shortage. So apparently it's been hard finding people who want to drive trucks for a very long time. But the issue that we have is an aging population at PITT OHIO. Luckily, we have long tenured employees and they're very satisfied there, but it's not a career that you want to extend into your later years. So we've been going into the communities and really educating high school students about what is the trucking industry, how it can be a career, how it can be either an addition to or an alternative to a college degree. And really trying to work with our communities for that employment aspect. We've got a lot of positive feedback. I realize that's not climate change, but it's a different aspect of it.
And Rod, are you interfacing with community members on a regular basis in any way around some of these issues specifically related to climate change?
I would say we have our health equity initiatives in general. And so if we think about health equity, it's climate justice, climate equity, we're all in this together. And so I think if you address these issues at the core and we have a root cause approach to even health equity, then we're starting to address the environment. We're starting to address the impacts of climate change. We're starting to really think about how the environment affects individuals, how their communities affect them, how we keep them from getting sick in the first place. Public health is about keeping people from getting sick in the first place. This is about primary prevention. And so we have to make sure that we do our part to try and protect the environment in order to make sure that people can breathe healthy air, drink, healthy water, et cetera. So I think it all goes together, and we don't need to think about environmentalism as something separate than public health. We're in this together. Even if it's reproductive justice, or some people might even say Black Lives Matter, all this, we're really thinking about systemic issues, systemic problems, and we need systemic solutions.
So the Reimagine movement is spreading. There's even a Reimagine Louisiana that has started up in the area that's called Cancer Alley. But it's got a lot of traction. And so locally, we are doing Reimagine Tickwack, which is the Turtles Creek watershed and airshed communities. And there's going to be a visioning session at the Braddock Library on December 11th from 5 to 8 p.m. So people who are interested in participating should come to that. And, getting ideas, coming up from the people.
Thank you. Justine, I wanted to ask if your company thinks about potential future risks related to climate change. We talked a little about the aging population of drivers and about automation. Is planning for the impacts of climate change part of your day-to-day?
Sure, definitely diesel fuel costs are a huge risk. If something would happen and all of a sudden the price of diesel shoots up, we have to figure out an alternate plan for what are we going to do so that we can continue to serve our customers in the community. And just again, with some of the climate issues that we have been seeing, how do we position trucks? How do we get equipment and necessary supplies where it's needed, whether it's Houston or Florida or other parts of the country that have been impacted so greatly by these large storms?
Thank you. And Dwayne, I wanted to ask, the Green New Deal proposal calls for things like a federal jobs guarantee, a minimum wage increase, and expanded unionization rights. How do you think those things are connected to the fight against climate change? And do you see organized labor support for the Green New Deal?
I think that, I'm not going to say that organized labor is going to outright say, yes, we're going to support the Green New Deal, because that would be wrong of me to say that. What we would like to see is we'd like to see the environmentalists support good paying union jobs, a sustainable living wage, a good minimum wage, good benefits. And I think if that is the case, I think that it would come a long way to bringing organized labor to the table. I don't think organized labor has ever been at the table with the environmentalists, and that's something I think should happen. And I think it would make it a lot easier.
Are you familiar with the Blue Green Alliance, which is Sierra Club's partnership? Are you involved?
I was just introduced to it. I've pulled their webpage up. I've looked at it a little bit, but I didn't know anything about it actually until a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
But I want to make two other little points before you move on to the next question. Sure. The United Mine Workers has never denied the science of climate change. We would never do that. We have not. And I think I can speak for the labor movement on this issue. It is not a USA problem. It's a global problem. If we shut down every coal-fired power plant in this country, it's still not going to solve our problem. We still got pollution coming from all over the world to the United States. So it is a global problem, and I think that's where it has to go. It has to be a global issue, how we solve it.
Thank you. We're approaching the end of our conversation, so I'm hoping we can end on an optimistic note. When talking about climate change, it can be easy to feel disempowered because the scale of the problem is so huge and the language around it tends to be so apocalyptic. So how can we help people in this region in particular feel empowered to protect their communities from the effects of climate change and work towards slowing climate change?
Well, one thing is, there are things that have worked in the past. I think they were referred to today, but like, the ozone hole. And that actually, I just was reading this, that it was Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan who worked together to pass a treaty that caused that. I mean, they're not two people you'd think of as environmentalists, And so I think, all of us are in this together, And if we approach it together and look at and remain solutions oriented, that's going to go a long way. And you know, we can see climate change now. That's why the attitudes are changing, because we see the weather right in front of us. So having solutions that go with that are important, and that can keep us focused.
I would say that if we really accept the fact that disparities exist, I mean, if we think about just some of the stats I've seen recently, the CDC says that African American children are 2 times more likely to have asthma, 3 times more likely to be hospitalized, 10 times more likely to die from an asthma attack. If we accept the fact that that's not happening for everybody, then we know that there's potential hope for us to make a better situation, right, for some of these at-risk populations. So there's something that's out there that's working. It's not just your biology, it can be your environment. It is your environment. So how can we put people in a different position for success at healthy outcomes? I think that the opportunities are there. We just have to help people realize what the potential is, what their power might be, and again, go back and talk to them about the solutions that will work, that have worked in the past, and not just always feel like we need to do something new.
I'm going to refer back to the panel before us, because I really think the upcoming generation is really going to demand us to do something. And they are not going to work for companies that are disreputable. They are going to want to work for companies that are innovative and adding solutions and coming up with a way of solving this problem. So I think, you know, from a business point of view, if we want to be competitive, especially in the talent market, we have work to do to make ourselves competitive in that market.
I think that we have to work from our youth up in our schools. It has to be taught more in our schools about climate change. It is a real problem. I think we have to exhort our corporations to get their heads out of the sand and not put the bottom line profit ahead of this climate change that's happening. And I think if that can be done, it's a big step forward.
Thank you. So we're the local voices panel. Is there anything else you'd like folks to know today as representatives of the Pittsburgh region?
I would just say a lot of what PITT OHIO has done would not have been able to be done without collaboration. There's a tremendous amount of talent in this region. I mentioned Ron Godovic, I'm gonna shout him out again. But even our microgrid at Harr would not have been possible without the collaboration of the universities, of several other companies coming in and trying to solve a really complex engineering problem. I will tell you, PITT OHIO did not have the engineers on hand to do that kind of work. So I think we're in a really great place locally with a tremendous amount of talent and people who are excited to try to solve these kinds of problems.
I think that with the climate change and it's happening, in order to, there will be displaced workers in the future. I think that we need to start building the infrastructure in our country, and that could take up a lot of the slack for workers and good paying jobs, so you would be able to transition into those jobs with that Just Transition logo.
And I would say, thinking about, again, who's not at the table, there are so many community-based organizations here locally, grassroots level organizations that want to be involved and want to be engaged. I think they need to be resourced to do so. Resource, whether that's education, awareness, whether it's capacity building. There are many grants out there. There are many MINI grants that are out there. There are other grants that might be available for organizations to take action at the local and neighborhood level, but are they positioned well to apply, to receive our elected officials, even making sure that those funds are allocated to the appropriate areas? I think there are roles that we can play to improve the situations.
And I think to consider all aspects across the region, people being involved in their communities, communities coming up with solutions that fit them, but having interaction across the region, because we really all need to come together to deal with what's happening. It is a crisis, and we need to address it, and empowering communities, whether they have the power to say, to make things what they want, really getting people involved to do that.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.